la bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito así, nada.
What's up, everybody? Happy Saturday. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ramiro Sebastián Fúnez, episode 2, Unmasking Imperialism, on my YouTube channel, Ramiro Sebastián Fúnez. Today, we're talking about PragerU lies about socialism, our favorite buddies over at PragerU. And today, joining us, we have none other than my longtime friend, good comrade of mine. I've known him for years, Caleb Maupin, journalist and political analyst based in New York City. How's it going, Caleb?
All is good. How are you doing, Ramiro?
I'm doing well. I just am going to go celebrate Ofelia's birthday today. Today is Ofelia's birthday. Ofelia is my girlfriend. She's also a co-editor of Anticonquista. That's another project we're involved with. For everybody watching and listening, if you don't already follow us, Anticonquista, go ahead and do so. I'm also starting this stream, Unmasking Imperialism, on my YouTube channel, where we are debunking imperialist propaganda, capitalist propaganda that slanders socialism and communism around the world. And I couldn't think of anyone better to debunk some of these PragerU videos than Caleb. If you get a chance, please make sure to subscribe to Caleb, youtube.com/Caleb Maupin TV, I believe is the URL. Please go and follow his channel. I've learned so much from Caleb's videos. I think Caleb is probably one of the first people I listen to every day when I'm working out or I'm trying to get knowledge about world events. And he has such a great wealth of information about socialism, history, philosophy. So please make sure and go to follow his YouTube channel. It is a great resource. Caleb, just maybe kicking off before we get into some of these videos, we're going to be watching 2 videos from PragerU. PragerU is this right-wing NGO, think tank. I don't know exactly what they are, but they're huge on the internet. They're huge on YouTube. They have all of these videos that click to debunk socialism, that promote free market capitalism, this satanic, evil, libertarian Wall Street mentality of individualism, of greed. And it's important that as socialists, as revolutionaries, we combat this propaganda, because this is the dominant narrative online. This is the narrative that's winning. And we need to win people over to our side, to socialism. And Caleb, maybe why don't you just give us some thoughts on PragerU? I know you've done some response videos to PragerU as well.
Well, I think the most disturbing thing about PragerU is that a lot of teachers use it in their classrooms. Because it has the name U, like PragerU, you get the impression it's a university or it's some kind of academic institution. And it's not. But a lot of school kids end up watching this, and a lot of the things that they say in their videos are just wildly inaccurate. I made a video refuting their video, Who Was Karl Marx, by Paul Kenger, because that video, Who Was Karl Marx, by PragerU, just said lie after lie after lie. Wildly inaccurate statements that I mean, this man should be embarrassed. They called the man who made the video, calls himself a political scientist, but he says things that are just wildly ignorant and inaccurate about history, beyond, whether socialism is better than capitalism. This guy just doesn't know anything about Karl Marx. I mean, He says that nobody believed in Marxism really until the Russian Revolution of 1917, ignoring the huge political parties and trade unions. And Marxism was all over Europe prior to 1917. He says things that everywhere socialism has ever been implemented, it's made life worse. Well, look at China before the communists came in. Look at China now. Look at Russia before the communists came in. Look at Russia now. It's pretty clear. Look at Cuba before 1959. Look at Cuba now. You can't say that it made life worse. You can criticize it in one way or another, but I'm sorry, before the communists came in, these countries didn't have electricity or running water. There was mass illiteracy. I mean, you just can't say that. But they say these wildly inaccurate things. They appeal to a conservative bias. PragerU is very much a neocon outlet. It gets a lot of funding from fracking companies and from Betsy DeVos and the Koch brothers and other more conservative elements of the ruling class that are more sympathetic to Trump. However, you'll notice that PragerU was pretty silent about QAnon and pretty silent about the attacks on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, and that they're afraid to associate themselves with the more dissident and extreme elements in the Trump camp. They're basically just a neocon outlet, reinforcing the old America is the greatest country in the world, and if you don't like it here, move to another country. It's your standard neocon outlet. And I think they're very nervous to be associated with Trump and with the way the right wing has gone, which is interesting to look at.
I think that's a great breakdown of PragerU, especially their ideological bent. I think as well, I would add to that, they're very pro-Israel, they're very pro-Zionist, in favor of the Israeli regime against Palestinian human rights. And they have this kind of West is best mentality that the Western world has to teach the underdeveloped world. And I think one thing that we can take from studying and observing PragerU is studying their method of propaganda. I will say that they do have a clean product. They do have good quality visuals. They have good graphic artists. Their editing is on point. And as leftists, as content creators on the left, we should be studying what they're doing and applying it for our methods and our streams, because the way to win the information war and the media war is not just to debunk the enemy, but to outproduce the enemy. And I think that's something that's central to your understanding of socialism as well with your book. I highly recommend people get this book, by the way, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. It's on Amazon. It's one of the best socialist books out there today in the 21st century that has such a great mentality and mindset in terms of defeating the enemy. We're not going to defeat the enemy by calling them out, by cancel culture, by just taking down and tearing down. We have to outbuild, produce. We have to be better than the enemy. And I think that PragerU is a good outlet to study and to figure out how we can surpass and create better content than they do. And so I think that it's also good to have you here, because I think the solutions you're proposing and talking about, which we can get into later with the Center for Political Innovation, are a good antidote to PragerU. Before going into the first clip, which is Capitalism versus Socialism featuring Andy Puzder, maybe, Caleb, you can just quickly define for us, what is the difference between socialism and capitalism?
Well, there's a lot of confusion about it. A lot of people think capitalism is when you have money, and so they like capitalism because they want to have money, right? They like having money. When they don't have money, they're not happy. And they have money, they have money, so they're happy. So they think, I like capitalism because I have money. Well, that's not what the difference is. Go to any socialist country, people have money. Some people think that socialism is giving people free stuff, right? That if I get free healthcare, well, that's socialism. There's many capitalist countries like Britain, like France, like Germany that have free healthcare, free education. In fact, every industrial country in the world, except for the United States, provides healthcare to its citizens, either with a national healthcare service or with a state insurance plan. So, and all those are capitalist countries. So just giving people free healthcare, giving people free college, looks good, but it's not socialism. The difference between socialism and capitalism is that in capitalism, production is carried out to make profits. We don't have houses because people need a nice place to live. We have houses so landlords and banks and corporations can make money producing them and selling them. We don't have food so people can eat it. We have food so that agribusiness and big box stores and big corporations like Kraft can make money from selling food. We have production organized for profit, and that's capitalism. Socialism is the system in which production is organized to serve human needs. It's when the banks and the factories and the major industries and the centers of economic power are forced to work in the interest of society overall, not just in the interest of profits. And socialism sometimes has a market sector. Sometimes it's a totally state-run economy. Worker cooperative enterprises and profit-sharing entities can be part of socialism, state-run industries. But overall, if production is planned out based on what society needs, that's socialism. If production is carried out for the profits of a small group of people who own the means of production, that's capitalism. And that's the difference, right? And, in many countries around the world that are capitalist, you see the irrationality of capitalism. You see hunger and unemployment aside abundance. Under capitalism, people are hungry, not because there's not enough food, because there's too much food. People are homeless because there are too many houses. This is a highly irrational system where abundance creates poverty. In a rational society, self-driving cars, for example, would be a good thing. We'd be happy about self-driving cars because there'd be less work, right? And we wouldn't need drivers. But under capitalism, a technological innovation like self-driving cars leads to mass unemployment. Capitalism is irrational. You need society to control the means of production and plan it out. And it's with socialism that China became a global superpower. It's with socialism that the Soviet Union defeated the Nazis and invented space travel and electrified the country. It's with socialism that Cuba has built a society that has one of the highest life expectancies in Latin America and has wiped out illiteracy and has an amazing healthcare system that's praised all over the world. Socialism has been very successful. Meanwhile, capitalism is crashing and burning all over the world. The irrational greed of a small group of billionaires and bankers who dominate the world is leading society toward destruction, mass unemployment, poverty, living standards dropping. And if we get rid of that greed, and if we have society organized to serve the people, that's socialism.
That's such a great breakdown of socialism versus capitalism that is understandable, that anybody outside can understand. Right now, I'm in the process of rereading Capital Volume 1. And even myself, as somebody who has been on the left for a few years now, it still takes me a while to really sit down, read, and understand. That's not to say that Marx doesn't do a great job. I think he does an excellent job at explaining it. But I think today in the 21st century, it's important to break down these concepts in such an easy to understand way, the way that you present it, because I think also the time is different. Our attention, our minds are much different than they were in the 1800s. We're constantly bombarded with media. We're overstimulated with information. I think some of the topics you talk about on your streams, over socialization, is really good. And we need content that is digestible and easy to understand. And so I think that's a great breakdown. Let's just jump right into the first clip, Capitalism versus Socialism by Andy Puzder. And let's see what you think, Caleb.
Capitalism versus socialism. We can sum up each economic system in one line. Capitalism is based on human greed. Socialism is based on human need, right? No, wrong, so wrong. It's exactly backwards. And I'll prove it to you. Been on Amazon lately? Each of the thousands of products Amazon offers represents the work of people who believe they have something you want or need. If they're right, they prosper. If they're wrong, they don't. That's how the free market works. It encourages people to improve their lives by satisfying the needs of others. No one starts a business making a thing or providing a service for themselves. They start a business to make things or provide services for others. Now, I speak from personal experience. When I was the CEO of the company that owns Carl's Jr. and Hardee's restaurant chains, we spent millions of dollars every year trying to determine what customers wanted. If our customers didn't like something, we changed it, and fast. Because if we didn't, our competitors would, pun intended, eat us for lunch. The consumer, that's you, has the ultimate power. In effect, you vote with every dollar you spend. In a socialist economy, the government has the ultimate power. It decides what you get from a limited supply it decides should exist. instead of millions of people making millions of decisions about what they want. A few people, government elites, decide what people should have and how much they should pay for it. Not surprisingly, they always get it wrong. Have you ever noticed that late-stage socialist failures always run out of essential items like toilet paper? Of course, this isn't a problem for those who have the right connections with the right people. Those chosen few get whatever they want. But everyone else is out of luck. Venezuela, once the richest country in South America, is the most recent example of socialism driving a prosperous country into an economic ditch. Now, maybe you think it's an unfair example. I'm not sure why, but okay. We'll ignore the fact that leftist activists celebrated it as a great socialist success right up until it wasn't. But what about Western European countries? Don't they have socialist economies? People seem pretty happy there. Why can't we have what they have? Free healthcare, free college, stronger unions. Good question, and the answer may surprise you. There are no socialist countries in Western Europe. Most are just as capitalist as the United States. The only difference, and it's a big one, is that they offer more government benefits than the U.S. does. We can argue about the cost of these benefits and the point at which they reduce individual initiative, thus doing more harm than good. Scandinavians have been debating those questions for years. But only a free market capitalist economy can produce the wealth necessary to sustain all of the supposedly free stuff Europeans enjoy. To get the free stuff, after all, you have to create enough wealth to generate enough tax revenue to pay for everything the government gives away. Without capitalism, you're Venezuela. In a 2015 speech at Harvard, Denmark's prime minister took great pains to make this point. I know that some people in the U.S. associate the Nordic model with socialism. Therefore, I would like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy. So when you point to Denmark as a paragon of socialism, you're really singing the praises of capitalism. The more capitalism, the less socialism you need. Look at America since 2017. A policy of lower taxes and less government regulation, that's more capitalism, has led to a robust economic expansion, something thought impossible just a few years earlier. Unemployment, notably among minority groups typically most at risk for poverty, is at a generational low. Economic expansion gets people off welfare and into work. That's less socialism. None of this requires a degree in economics. Common sense is all you need. That's why it's so frustrating to see young people praising socialism and criticizing capitalism. It's bad enough that they're working against their own interests, better job prospects, better wages, personal freedom. But they're also working against the interest of the less fortunate. Capitalism leads to economic democracy. Socialism leads to the economic dictatorship of the elite. Always and everywhere. So beware what you ask for. You just might get it. I'm Andy Puzder, the author of The Capitalist Comeback for Prager University.
This guy, he looks like the evil guy in every horror movie who has like a secret layer of of techniques. But so we just finished watching this PragerU video, Capitalism versus Socialism by Andy Puzder. Caleb, what'd you think about everything that this guy said?
Well, I took some notes. When the first thing he opens up by saying that that this notion that socialism is production according to need and capitalism is production according to greed is false. And it's funny because the defenders of capitalism will often make statements like greed is good. Ayn Rand wrote an entire book called The Virtue of Selfishness. The belief that compassion and empathy and basic feelings of human solidarity are somehow wrong, and that we should have a society where people are simply predatory and don't have any feeling of connection to other people and don't have any empathy or kindness or compassion is something that defenders of neoliberal capitalism widely believe and widely promote. So that's kind of disingenuous for him to make that point. I thought it was interesting that he also made a point of using small business analogies. And that's one of the common tricks that you will see done in standard libertarian propaganda. They talk about capitalism as if it is all a nice, quaint little small town where there's two little bakeries that have cookies, and the people in the town vote with their dollars and pick which bakery has the best cookies. And it's so, and that makes capitalism sound so nice, but that's not the world we live in. We live in a world of huge multinational corporations and monopolies, international conglomerates, huge corporations dominating the world, driving wages down, controlling whole countries' economies, and grinding the United States into poverty. So that's kind of a fantasy. Capitalism is not in that pre-industrial stage any longer. We live in an era of capitalism in its highest stage of imperialism. As far as the toilet paper thing, I have been to socialist countries around the world, and you have been to socialist countries around the world. Now, tell me, you went to China. Now, did they have toilet paper in China?
Not only did they have toilet paper everywhere in China, but they had public bathrooms everywhere, fully stocked with equipment, and it was the cleanest bathrooms I've ever seen.
Yeah. I've been to the socialist countries of Latin America, lots of toilet paper. I've been to Iran, where they overthrew the system. The slogan of the government in Iran is not capitalism, but Islam. The state controls major centers of economic power. Plenty of toilet paper in Iran. Venezuela's problems started in 2014 with the oil price drop. And the Venezuelans are very open about the fact that their mistake is that, and their weakness is that they have kind of a one commodity economy, right? That they have to import a lot of things, and oil is basically, what their economy is centered around. So when the oil price dramatically decreased, and then the United States put huge sanctions on the country and made it very hard for them to import international products that they import, and they don't produce a lot of things domestically. That's when the problems began. But you look at Bolivia. Under the leadership of Evo Morales, they had the highest rate of GDP growth in all of South America. Huge strides in raising people up out of poverty. Correa, you lived in Ecuador under Correa. I visited Ecuador under Correa. You've seen huge economic advancement take place. This is just a misrepresentation, because Venezuela, starting in 2014, has had problems due to the fact that oil is the center of their economy, and the USA has just crushed them with sanctions and made it hard for them to import things. That doesn't define all the history of socialism at all. And in fact, he says leftists hailed Venezuela as a socialist success. Well, so did the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal said that until 2014, Venezuela's economy was very strong. And if you look at it, Chavez was elected in 1998. In 2003, they announced they were moving toward 21st century socialism, and they built huge highways. They wiped out illiteracy in the country. I went to neighborhoods in Caracas where every house was built by the socialist government with an interest-free loan. I saw the huge infrastructure projects that they had there. The power plants that were constructed, with assistance from China. It's like, yes, there were huge successes under socialism and the leadership of the Bolivarians. The problems began with that particularly intense crisis in 2014. And so to make it sound like, all that's ever happened in Venezuela is they had socialism and then there was no toilet paper all of a sudden. That's such an oversimplification. And the socialist experience around the world is far different than that. Wouldn't you agree?
Most definitely. And people fail to recognize the role of imperialist sabotage, destabilization. The Soviet Union, since day one, was attacked by the Western powers, invaded. It was purposefully destabilized. There were the invasion of the Baku oil fields. Same thing with the People's Republic of China, constant attacks against China. Cuba, since day one of the Cuban Revolution, has been under attack by Western imperialism, sanctions, the blockade by the United States, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Ecuador, Bolivia. So many countries that have been in the process of building socialism have been attacked from day one. And I think that's something that mainstream media tends to hide, and that a lot of people don't really see, is that I like one thing that you say that always cracks me up, that is funny, is that, people on the left, sometimes in the US, have this idea that you just have to say the magic words and that automatically you'll have the perfect model of socialism, that you get a magic wand, and once you're in power, you can immediately decide how everything will be structured. But that fails to recognize the role of imperialist sabotage, stabilization. When I was living in Ecuador, I was working for Telesur, and we were frequently covering the imperialist destabilization of Venezuela. And countless stories that we would see every day were stories of cash hoarding people from in Venezuela and around the region who are hoarding bolivars, the currency of Venezuela, purposefully, who are hoarding food, tons and tons of food in warehouses, who are hoarding technology. And these kinds of stories never get much attention in mainstream media, but they play a huge role in your ability to build socialism. And I think that's one of the aspects that's almost never talked about.
Yeah, I mean, compare conditions in Guatemala or Honduras to conditions in Nicaragua, and you can see a very big contrast between socialism and capitalism. The Nicaraguan people have had a huge strides to eradicate poverty. Huge, they have this huge micro entrepreneurs program enabling low-income Nicaraguans to start their own businesses. Huge achievements. Guatemala, great example of free market neoliberal economics, poverty, drug gangs. Honduras, great example of free market economics, poverty, drug gangs, misery. It's very clear. Compare Cuba to Haiti, for example. Haiti is a free market country. There's many examples of this, and he points to one problem that Venezuela has had, in the recent years, and that's supposed to define the entire history of socialism. And even he admits that those problems didn't even start until 2014. It's just so disingenuous, I would say. I will say that part of the video that I did agree with was when he said that the Western European countries are not socialist, right? Yeah. And they're not. Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, they're not socialist countries. Those are capitalist countries. And he's right about that. They're capitalist countries that provide, a higher layer of benefits. Now, he's right about that. What's interesting, though, is that, we are constantly told by the right wing in the United States that if our government was to provide those benefits, everyone would just starve and die, and we'd be reduced to third world conditions. And that clearly hasn't happened in Germany, France, or Norway, or Sweden. So, he's kind of admitting there that these benefits that right wingers and libertarians like himself have fought tooth and nail against don't destroy countries. So that's a little bit of an admission on his part. But he's right that they're not socialist. But he says that only a capitalist country could develop the kind of wealth that would make these benefits possible. I think what he's leaving out is that the reason that these Western countries have this huge amount of wealth is due to the exploitation of the third world. I mean, Western Europe developed, and these huge corporations based in Germany and France and Britain and the United States went around the world holding back development, seizing countries as captive markets and holding countries in poverty. And it was through that impoverishment of the developing world and seizing the developing world as captive markets that the West was able to make super profits. And with those super profits, yes, the situation was that you could have a bigger welfare state in the West because of the fact that the Western corporations were dominating the world. When the British went to India, they burned down all their textile mills and forced them to import their cloth from Britain. So the British textile companies got super wealthy and were making so much profits because they controlled the Indian markets that sure, then eventually, after 100 years of class struggle, they could afford to, give more benefits and stuff to British workers. And that aspect was completely obscured, that the welfare states, it wasn't just capitalism that created them. It was capitalism in its monopoly stage, imperialism, enabling the huge monopolies based in the West to have super profits and therefore have a little bit more of an ability to buy off and give a few crumbs to the workers at home.
Yeah, it's definitely a great breakdown. And I think another part of the video that was just completely false was when he talks about capitalism leading to economic democracy, voting with your dollars, you vote with your dollars, and socialism leads to an economic dictatorship of the elite. Going back to the examples you gave, like free market countries in Latin America, especially Honduras, where my family's from, it's the complete opposite. In Honduras, you have the economic dictatorship of the elite who are capitalists, who are ruling the economy. There is no purchasing power. People don't have the ability to vote with their dollars because there are no dollars. There's no money, there's no jobs. Everything is privatized. And this insane idea that we can vote with our dollars and that capitalism brings the best form of democracy is based on this utopian model of capitalism that is not even realistic. And it's interesting because the same way that we talk about socialism, utopian versus scientific, I think that PragerU and a lot of these libertarians also have a utopian view of capitalism, because at least there are some people within the capitalist right who will admit that capitalism has a lot of problems. But going into our next clip, we have your favorite commentator, Caleb, Dinesh D'Souza. We know
the thing about voting with your dollar.
Yeah.
You know, Keynesian economists, those are not Marxists, have ripped that voting with your dollars things to shreds, because they pointed out that that only works if the consumer has unlimited choice. You know what I mean? If the consumer has equal access to every possible option, and they have the equal ability to do that, then yes, they will vote with their dollars for the best one. But most of the time, you know, in your neighborhood, how many stores are there, right? So, you know, when you go shopping, you don't sit down and have a list of every possible store that could ever sell what you want, right? And determine which. Most of the time, you don't have equal access to every potential seller, right? You don't have equal opportunity to go and buy from every seller. And that exists in like a kind of obscure capitalist fantasy. That you know, there's maybe elements of truth in that, but in most situations, people don't have the ability to strategically just buy with their dollars. They buy from the store in their neighborhood. In a lot of cases, when it comes to like power companies, you know, you have one utility company, right? You know, it's a state monopoly. You can't have 12 power companies to pick from, right? And that's kind of it's just not true. I mean, any good student of economics will tell you that voting with your dollars thing, that's only true in like libertarian fantasy land. It's not true in the real world, right? You know, I'm sure when you go to the store and buy food, you don't sit there and compare the prices and the services of 17 different companies and make it's ridiculous. That's not reality.
That's exactly right. It's a false understanding of democracy and a utopian understanding of capitalism that doesn't correspond to reality at all. Most people are forced to buy from the same corporations, the same companies, especially in the global south, in Honduras and Haiti and Guatemala and so many other countries where it's just one or two companies that run the entire. I mean, we can even talk about the United Fruit Company, for example, where people were forced to not only work there, but buy the products of their labor and land back from themselves, because that was the only company that was operating there. And I think that's a good analogy.
Yeah, Marx talks about the general law of capitalist accumulation. And capitalist corporations, they either expand or they die. And you generally get one or two monopolies that dominate. And then that ability to vote with your choices becomes, vote with your dollars becomes restricted and more restricted. And the corporations go out of business and bigger corporations are formed, like Walmart. Do you think that Walmart is sitting there doing consumer research? No, they've got a virtual monopoly as a result of the natural workings of the capitalist system. Wealth centralizes, big corporations expand, smaller corporations are destroyed. The natural processes of capitalism eliminate that competitive stage that these libertarians like to fantasize is like the permanent stage of the market.
As I'm rereading Capital and comparing that to Amazon and today, it's crazy to see how Marx was on point in predicting this and writing this hundreds of years ago, as we see Amazon take over the US economy, the global economy. And it's just really insane to think that people believe capitalism is more democratic. And so this next video is Capitalism versus Socialism, which is more democratic, by Dinesh D'Souza. Let's hear what he has to say.
Why is socialism so popular? Less than 10 years ago, you couldn't refer to socialism in a positive way and hope to have a career in American politics. Socialism was referred to as the S word. Now it is affirmed either explicitly or implicitly by just about everyone on the left. And amazingly, given socialism's record of failure, the socialists seem to be gaining ground. Why? What makes socialism so attractive to so many? Socialism, according to its proponents, is more democratic and therefore more moral than capitalism. Leftist filmmaker Michael Moore explains it for us. Democratic socialism means everyone has a seat at the table and everybody gets a slice of the pie. The famed socialist writer Irving Howe wrote something similar in his 1982 autobiography. We believe that the democracy in our political life should also be extended deeply into economic life. The basic idea here is that socialism is vindicated through its roots in popular consent. If a majority of people working through their elected representatives declares something to be a public entitlement, say free college or free health care, then they are justified in extracting resources from those who create wealth to pay for it. As Nathan Robinson argues in his book, Why You Should Be a Socialist, the moral imperative is to place the economy under the control of the people. Sounds good, at least superficially, until you dig a bit below the surface. First, what direct control do the people really have over any government institution? What control do the British people have over the National Health Service? What control do Americans have over the Department of Motor Vehicles or the U.S. Post Office? The answer, of course, is none. Given its practical impossibility, genuine popular control over government institutions is a mirage. Second, what if 51% of Americans vote to confiscate the resources of a single person, say Bill Gates? Does that make it right? Under an authoritarian socialist government, a single dictator seizes the fruits of your labor. Everyone is against that. Under democratic socialism, a majority does. The end result is the same. You've been robbed. The fundamental problem with democratic socialism, however, is its assumption that in a free market system, the economy is not under the control of the people. This is exactly the opposite of how things work. Let me explain. Each of us are not only citizens, we are also consumers. These are overlapping categories. Every citizen is a consumer, and every consumer is also a citizen. The consumer, like the citizen, is a voter. As citizens, we vote once every 2 or 4 years. As consumers, we vote many times a day. The citizen votes with a ballot, which costs him nothing except the inconvenience of going to the polls. The consumer votes with his money, which costs him a lot, all the time and effort he put in to earn that money. Only a fraction of citizens are eligible to vote at the ballot box, but every consumer votes in the marketplace, even felons, even children. Illegal aliens cannot vote for political candidates, but they too vote with their money. Moreover, citizens participate in a system of representative democracy. Their views are filtered through the politicians who represent them. Consumers, by contrast, vote in a system of direct democracy. If you prefer an Audi to a Lexus or the Apple iPhone to the Samsung Galaxy, you don't have to elect some other guy to exercise these preferences. You do it directly yourself by paying for them. Here we see the secret of how those billionaires like Jeff Bezos got so rich. We made them rich. The inequality that socialists complain about is the result of popular mandate. Want fewer billionaires? Stop buying their stuff. Free markets work not through greed or exploitation, but by satisfying our wants. And the most successful entrepreneurs are those who anticipate our wants even before we have them. No one wrote Steve Jobs asking him to make a phone that took pictures, allowed people to text messages, and listen to music. He conceived it and built it before we knew we couldn't live without it. Market economies involve a level of popular participation and democratic consent that politics can only envy. We don't need to extend democracy from the political to the economic sphere. We already have it. And the moral grounding of free markets, just like that of our political system, is in the will of the people. In the latter case, a will expressed only on election day. In the former case, a will expressed deliberately, emphatically, constantly. We don't need socialism because we already have something more moral and more democratic. It's called capitalism. I'm Dinesh D'Souza for Prager University.
This video was made possible through a generous donation from Fred and Joyce Lucas.
So there you have it, Dinesh D'Souza breaking down capitalism and socialism. What do you think, Caleb?
Well, I mean, I want to respond first to one of the most obvious lies in the video, because it is a big pet peeve of mine, and I see this all the time. And people need to not let them get away with this. And that's the cell phone fallacy, right? Oh, you have a smartphone. That's capitalism. That capitalism made your smartphone. You know, look at that. Okay, there are so many things wrong with this. But let's just talk about basic facts. The first cell phone in history was made in the Soviet Union by Leonid Kaprianovich in 1957. So the idea that socialism can't produce a cellular phone or a mobile phone is false. Your cell phone uses IED lights. It's an IED screen. Do you know where the first IED lights were invented? In the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union in 1927 invented IED lights. So the notion that a socialist society could not produce technological innovation to make a phone is ridiculous. Furthermore, however, if you look into other developments that led to the creation of smartphones, they tended to come from government-funded research in the United States. The CIA built Silicon Valley. The national, the National Security Agency, NSA, the intelligence agencies, they poured lots of money into setting up Silicon Valley. The free market was not going to create the computer revolution. During the Cold War, you can read about this. IBM, Microsoft, all of these companies got huge subsidies from the American intelligence apparatus in order to get going. The free market was not going to enable the computer revolution to happen. It was because of strategic decisions by the state that the United States became the center of the computer revolution. Look, the basis for modern computing is the decoder machine of Alan Turing. And that was a military project made by the British state, right? And furthermore, in the 1980s, the Soviet Union, despite having far less resources to invest in it, they even developed a home computer system. This is a fact. In the 1980s, even though there was a blockade, you couldn't get high technology in the Soviet Union, they actually did develop their own home computer system. They didn't have the resources to mass produce it because they were blockaded. So this whole capitalism creates cell phones. Your smartphone proves how great capitalism is. No, your smartphone proves how great socialism is. Your smartphone proves that the state, when the state intervenes and funds technological innovation, you can get creativity. But no, that whole thing is just completely and utterly false. And it's my pet peeve that I see people get away with this. I mean, I just see it all the time. People say this, oh, your smartphone proves capitalism is great. No, your smartphone proves that socialism and, capitalist state intervention in the economy produces technological innovation. It does not prove that the free market does it. The free market did not create your smartphone. It just didn't happen. Like, some things are true, some things are not. The free market created your smartphone is a lie.
That's definitely a pet peeve of mine as well. I've encountered that with so many people on the right, especially from the right-wing Venezuelans or the right-wing Cubans who say that, who are like, why the phone that you use to talk bad about capitalism was created by capitalism. And it's just a complete non sequitur and complete nonsense. And there's so many other accomplishments from socialist countries, like even computing. Modern computers wouldn't be around without important developments by the Soviet Union in computing, laser eye surgery, so much technology that was created under socialist governments. And even China today, like, there's so many the other day, me and Ophelia were watching a documentary about China and some Western guy who's like in China, and he's like, wow, like, I'm so surprised to see how advanced it is. And like, what is it that's leading to this industrial growth? And it's like socialism. Same thing with Russia as well. The infrastructure of socialism, if you compare Russia and China before and after socialism, it's like night and day. And it's really interesting to see how people are just baffled by how socialism can actually produce wealth.
Yeah. Now, the big issue in the video was the issue of democracy. And honestly, we need to just be frank about this. This is a mistake, I think, that has been made. That, because we have been hammered home in the United States that, communist countries are dictatorships and capitalist countries are democratic. A lot of the more moderate wings of socialism, the social democrats, have just emphasized, well, we want democracy. We want democracy. Socialism is about democracy. And Irving Howe, who he quoted, that was a longtime CIA figure. Right? His career goes back to Partisan Review magazine. Irving Howe blatantly said that as a Trotskyite and as a socialist, he was on the U.S. side in the Cold War. He considered socialism to be just a wing of the American and Western side in the Cold War against evil Stalinism. Irving Howe was a social imperialist and a CIA operative. But this emphasis on democracy, if you read what Marxists and scientific Marxists have always said about democracy, and if you even go back to like ancient Greece where the term originated, in ancient Greece, they talked about like different forms of government. And they talked about how every form of government had like a good version and a negative version, right? The good form of like, an absolute ruler is called a monarchy, but a monarchy can degenerate into tyranny, right? A good form of having a small group of elites ruling is called an oligarchy, but an oligarchy can degenerate into plutocracy, right? And they argued that you can have an elected government, a republic, and that's the good form of an elected government, but a republic can degenerate into democracy, which they equated with mob rule. And that democracy literally just means the rule of the people. That's all it means. And it is a very vague term that is very, very hard to define. The rule of the people, right? Is the United States the rule of the people? I mean, I would say it's the rule of big monopolies and big corporations and all of that. But, for the most part, despite the fact that people are very angry about it and upset, if you ask most people in the United States, do you want to go and violently overthrow the government and install a new one? They would say, well, no, I don't want that. So you could argue that technically, because there is consent of the governed here, this is a democracy. But you could say the same for any socialist society, right? And that democracy is just this very vague concept that is very hard to define. And one thing that must be said is there is no socialist government in the world that I know of that would not be in power if they did not have a huge, huge amount of support from a very well-organized population, right? And in fact, I would say socialist countries, even when they've had to be authoritarian, they are so dependent on having an organized population to back them up that, in a sense, the people are more involved in governing. In Cuba, right? Fidel Castro would never have been able to hold on to power if there weren't, committees to defend the revolution in every neighborhood. There weren't people in every community that were trying to carry out the will of the Cuban Revolution, that were organized, that were involved, that were having neighborhood meetings and giving their opinions. What does the word Soviet mean, right? It means workers' council, right? And the Soviet Union came into existence because during the Russian Revolution, the working class of Russia, they formed these councils, these Soviets that were the basis of the new state. And every neighborhood, every community, there were Communist Party members who were carrying out the goals of the government on the local level. You go to any revolutionary country, Venezuela, they have the Bolivarian circles. In Nicaragua, they call them People's Power Councils or Community Power Councils, right? And Citizens Power Councils, I think they're called, right? Everywhere socialists are in power, they have to mobilize the public to back them up. They have to have average people get involved in politics to support them. Whereas in capitalist countries, you see the opposite. The capitalists would kind of prefer that we're not interested in politics. They like to kind of, depoliticize us, make us stupid, give us, dazzling, porno on our phones to just kind of let us tune out. And, and so in that sense, even when socialist countries have become authoritarian and had to crack down on forces that want to overthrow them and adopt more of a rigid militarized lifestyle, even then they're more democratic in the sense that the state depends on a well-organized and well-politicized population to carry out their will. But at the end of the day, democracy itself is just this vague term. As long as one group of people controls the means of production, there's going to be a level of dictatorship that accompanies democracy. In the United States, the means of production is controlled by big banks and corporations. And those who own the means of production in the United States, they basically select who is allowed to run for president and who's not. And, in a socialist society, when, the working class controls the means of production and we have a well-organized, citizenry that are organized in socialist societies, you have a similar situation where the working class and their organizations decide who is allowed to run for president and who's not. And there may be somebody who comes along who's opposed to socialism, and they might say, well, you're not welcome to run. Is that purely democratic? No. Pure democracy is only possible with the total elimination of class society. Only when you have a society in which there is no inequality, in which there's vast material abundance, only then would you be able to have pure democracy. And even then, democracy itself would start to fade away. You'd start to see the end of the need for a coercive state. But as long as there is a class struggle, there cannot be pure democracy and never will be. And this is a mistake that, the Michael Moore and Irving Howe and the more liberal elements, they say, oh, we just want to make society more democratic. And by saying that, they kind of open themselves up to these attacks from people like Dinesh D'Souza. We need to overcome this notion of democracy. Democracy is a vague concept, the rule of the people. What does it even mean? right? You could have a monarch who is very popular, right? You could have an absolute monarch who has total power. And if everyone in the country likes them, that would be the rule of the people, right? That would be democracy, right? But clearly that's not what people mean. Democracy is a vague concept that's very hard to define. And it's part of the propaganda, right? It's kind of, in the United States, we're always told America is the greatest country in the world. And you say, well, how? Like, what measurement? And people look at you, because it is. It just is, In the United States, we're told democracy is good. Well, what is democracy? It's having elections. It's good. Well, no, I mean, come on. Like, this is just silly kindergarten politics used to kind of dumb people down.
That's so true. And even in Honduras, where my family's from, the right wing equates democracy with elections. Like Malik Shah says in the chat, they also have to equate democracy with elections. That's so true, because in a country like Honduras or Haiti, which are neo-colonial, colonies of the U.S., which are controlled by the U.S. government, they have two parties, a liberal party, conservative party. They have elections every 4 years, but it's the same capitalist dictatorship, the same right-wing party that dominates the country, the same system. And it's just flawed, this idea that you have to have the same form of quote unquote democracy as the West in order to be democratic. And it's just a very outdated understanding of democracy. And I think you made a good point as well about how illogical it is, this understanding of one dictator. Like when they claim Maduro is in power, like Maduro's grasp on power, it's like, okay, so this one guy is forcing a country with 30 million people to follow his rule. How is he doing that? Like, even if you play it out, it doesn't even make sense, and it's just another way to expose their ridiculousness. Moving forward, kind of wrapping up here, I mean, I think you did a great job of breaking down these PragerU videos that are coming from the right. They're attacking socialism from the right wing. Now, there's also this other wing of propaganda, the liberal left, the synthetic left, that claims that socialism has to be weak, that anybody who is strong or anybody who is organized or anybody who is empowering families or communities is fascism, that authoritarianism is all bad, that countries like Venezuela or Iran are horrible. How do we combat the synthetic left propaganda against socialism? Because I think that's something that is a little harder to do. I think you've done a great job of it on your YouTube channel. People tend to be better of understanding right-wing propaganda against socialism, but even within the left and socialism, we have sectors that attack it from the synthetic left point of view, as you point out a lot on your YouTube channel. How do we go about breaking down some of these arguments? And maybe that can help lead us into your work with the Center for Political Innovation.
Sure. Well, the name of the new Center for Political Innovation textbook is "We Are City Builders," and really, socialism has always been a constructive movement. It's been about building a whole new society without inequality, without poverty, without suffering, raising people up, advancing science, advancing technology. Socialism is not about making everyone equally poor, as I've heard many times from the PragerU crowd. Socialism is about building a society with so much abundance that eventually we can get rid of the state, right? And the state can wither away, and that we can have a society from each according to their own ability to each according to their needs, where people just kind of do what they feel like doing and take what they want. And that is the ultimate vision of a stateless, classless world. And the way to get there is with human development and human progress. Socialism is not about tearing things down. It's not about, war and chaos and destruction. Socialism is about construction. It's about building a community of all humanity. It's about bringing people together to solve human problems and getting rid of the irrationality of greed.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I just heard like a really big sound on my end.
Oh, I think that was the garage. I think that was the garage. Somebody pulling the. It sounded like a machine gun or something.
Right. But it's about building, right? And that when these synthetic left elements, they often will say things like, they say that socialism is just worker cooperatives. Well, worker cooperatives are good. I'm not against worker cooperatives. They're very efficient. A worker cooperative enterprise. But at the end of the day, the problem with capitalism isn't just that every worker is not an owner of their workplace. The problem is profits in command. And if worker cooperatives function according to the market, you still have all the irrational problems of the market, right? You still have profits in command. You could have a military manufacturing, profit. What if Boeing was a cooperative? Do you think that would get rid of the military industrial complex? Right? I mean, you could have private prisons that are cooperatives where every guard is a shareholder. Do you think that would solve the prison industrial complex? That the problem is profits in command, right? Is production organized for profit? Right? It's eliminating the rule of profit so that human reason can dictate production. And a lot of these synthetic left elements, they seem to not recognize that. They seem to think that the rule of profits is okay, and they seem to be very opposed to central planning. And that is particularly dangerous. And on top of that, when the French Revolution happened, right? The French Revolution was not a socialist revolution. It was a revolution against feudalism. The bourgeoisie, in order to take power, they unleashed people's impulses. They gave people permission to be angry and desire revenge against the feudal aristocracy. They gave people permission to unleash a lot of their sexual impulses. Marquis de Sade was a particularly key figure in the French Revolution, agitating, and he was a pornographic writer and a rapist and a sexual predator who wrote these, and the French Revolution was largely an unleashing of people's desires, telling people that, oh, you're angry, now you can unleash your anger. Oh, you have sexual desires the Catholic Church has told you to restrain, now you can unleash them. That was largely what was done. And the French Revolution was very brutal and ugly. A lot of public executions, a lot of murder, a lot of killing, and a lot of violence and a lot of terror. And a lot of people, unfortunately, think that that's what being a leftist is. It's about releasing your anger, your aggression. You see the guillotine being used as a symbol in left-wing circles now, right? And stripped of economics. If you don't understand socialist economics, if socialism simply becomes, I'm mad at rich people because they're rich and I'm not, and I want to take revenge on them, and I want to unleash my sexual impulses, and I want to unleash all the anger I've got pumped up in me, you get a very destructive movement, right? That's destructiveness, right? And there's a place for anger. There's a place for wanting to rise up and not feel oppressed anymore. I'm not opposed to that, right? People are right to be angry about things, but socialism is not simply about tearing things down. It's not about chaos. And when the synthetic left, evaporates and removes economics, you can't talk about economics. That's class reductionism, Ramiro. Did you know that? Everything we just said on here is class reductionism, right? It gets ridiculous, right? And so if you strip leftism of economics and you make it just about unleashing people's impulses, you get a very, very, very destructive movement, right? And then you start to get the Malthusian ideas, right? The idea that we need to roll back human progress. There's too many people in the world. We're all breeding too much. Technology has gone too far. We need to get back to nature. And you get a very, very destructive movement, right? And that I would argue that what Marilyn Ferguson advocates in her book, The Aquarian Conspiracy, a lot of the ideology that you get from Silicon Valley, Marilyn Ferguson, she was the advisor to Al Gore. And what she advocated, this kind of unleashing of impulses and chaos to get us back to Mother Nature, and kind of an explosion to tear down the Western world because we've gotten away from the beauty of being one with nature. That is not progressive. That is not left wing. That is not city building. And that I think, unfortunately, leftism has become kind of associated with a lot of very, very destructive, I don't know what you want to call them, satanic or neo-pagan forces that have a very different agenda. I'm a socialist because I love my country. I love my community. I love working people. And I want us to get out of poverty. I want us to get out of the irrationality of greed. I want to end a system where profits come before people. I want the United States to be reborn on values of community, compassion, brotherhood, kindness. That's what I want. I don't want to destroy your community. I don't want there to be more chaos and violence and poverty and crime in your neighborhood. I want your life to get better. And I think that socialism and eliminating capitalism is the way to do it. Socialism is about love. It's not about hate. It's not about destruction. And I think that's what's largely missing. And that's why the Center for Political Innovation, we've put out this textbook, We Are City Builders. We are trying to build a new socialist movement that is about dismantling imperialism, dismantling Western capitalism, educating people, building up communities, and trying to build a whole new society in America amid the ruins that profits in command and greed have created. I can't hear you, Ramiro.
Sorry, I was on mute. That was such a great breakdown of the difference between the synthetic left and the real left. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I think I used to fall for a lot of the synthetic left stuff, the hippie culture, the 1960s portrayal of the left. And I think it's something that the left is still overcoming to this day. Even in other countries, I would say the synthetic left has also permeated in Latin American countries as well. I remember when I was living in Ecuador, the synthetic left groups that were backed by the National Endowment for Democracy and all these NGOs were claiming that Correa was homophobic and evil, and he was against Mother Nature, and they were using this left-sounding language and rhetoric to oppose development, to oppose progress. And it just, like, I think living in Ecuador and seeing that was such an eye-opener for me, because I saw that the citizens' revolution led by Correa, who in my opinion is a socialist, he's amazing, he was portrayed as the right wing. He was portrayed as conservative. And then these ultra-left Maoists who were voting for bankers, supporting NGOs, and opposing any and all development and progress were considered the left wing, even though it was a complete reversal. And so it's just crazy to see how they are able to completely switch the dichotomy. I think one of the best examples you gave was Tiananmen Square with the tank, the cold, dehumanized tank versus the one lone individual who was confronting this system. And I think that's a great example of the synthetic left propaganda against the real scientific socialist left, which I think we're both part of. Just kind of wrapping up here, maybe you can talk a little bit about the Center for Political Innovation, what any ideas you have for growing it, improving it, building it, and anything else that you want to leave our listeners and viewers with.
Well, right now, there's still restrictions around the pandemic. So we are limited. We have web conferences once a month. We have Zoom calls every Saturday, and folks are welcome to join that. But we want to swing into action and start having educational conferences around the country, and start doing community outreach and build outreach teams that do work and get out into communities. And we want to start, going around and developing a project. I say that the two main threats to America's working families are libertarianism and free market ideology, and synthetic leftism and destructiveness and pessimism dressed up as socialism. And that these two things need to be targeted. We need to have an effort to combat libertarianism and refute the lies that, you can't have a cell phone because, only capitalism can make a cell phone, and go and rip to shreds libertarian free market philosophy, and start demanding a government of action. So we need to combat libertarianism, and we need to combat synthetic leftism and say, no, socialism is not about tearing things down. It's not about trying to destroy the country. It's not, trying to make everyone in America more poor because they deserve it because they're an evil Euro settler. It's about trying to build a better society, and that eco-Malthusianism and the notion that technological progress is bad, and the notion that socialism is just a bunch of worker cooperatives, not a centrally planned economy, that these things need to be refuted. And so that's generally the idea, is that we will push back against that. We published Gaddafi's Green Book, and hundreds of copies of the Green Book laid out by yourself, a very good layout, have been distributed throughout the country, showing what Gaddafi and Libya really stood for. Prior to, the overthrow of socialism in Libya, Libya had the highest life expectancy in the African continent. They had the world's largest irrigation system. They raised millions out of poverty. And now that Libya has joined the free market capitalist system, they are drowning in poverty, and people are drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get out of Libya. They have slavery now in Libya, thanks to capitalism. They have instability. They've got two governments battling each other. This is a nightmare created by capitalism in Libya. And we need to show people this. And we need to start figuring out what kind of socialist model would work here in the United States, right? When I went to Ecuador in 2013 for the World Festival of Youth and Students, every communist group I met with from around the world said the same thing to me. They said, what is wrong with American communists? And it's true. And what you were talking about, what you noticed is the same problem I've noticed. Western leftism and what socialist movements around the world are completely divorced from each other. People don't join with Rafael Correa or Daniel Ortega or or with, Gaddafi, or with, Xi Jinping. They don't join those movements because they want to make life worse. They don't join those movements, because they want to be grungy and they want to like pretend they're like, they're edgy or something like that. They join it out of love for their people and love for their community and just being heartbroken about what the capitalist system has done. They want to raise their people out of poverty. They want to build a new society where people come first and not profits. It is an optimistic, city building, progressive movement. And that's what we need. We need a form of socialism in the United States that can be the kind of socialism we've seen around the world, that can be about raising people up and dismantling the system of imperialism.
Well said, Caleb. On that note, I think we'll wrap it up here. It's been really great to talk to you. Caleb is a journalist and political analyst based in New York City. Good friend of mine, longtime friend. He's somebody who I have learned tremendously from. I'm completely honest. I think you're probably one of the people I've learned the most from on YouTube because it's accessible. I've tried to read like David Harvey and some other people, and they have good stuff, but I think and Richard Wolff, I like some of their work, but I like the way you produce your content because it's very accessible. It's a conversation, and I think that's what it has to come back to, bringing socialism back to the economics and going against this narrative of class reductionism or economic determinism that a lot of liberals and synthetic leftists like to use against us. Because at the end of the day, when we're talking about Marx and capital, it's all about, at the fundamental root is economics. And we have to really get back to understanding that, studying it, because it's playing out right now as we speak. Amazon is taking over. A monopoly economy is forming in the United States. People are losing their jobs. There's more financial instability. And so I'm really glad to see you doing your work with CPI, Caleb. And I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much. And again, this was episode 2, Unmasking Imperialism. Take care, Caleb.
Sure thing.